How's it going, everyone? Shane here with the INR Techie. Today we are going to be installing a 3.5 inch to 2.5 inch conversion kit for hard drives into a desktop. Now we're going to be doing this because I've got a couple of old hard drives that I salvaged out of laptops. I've got an 80 gig SSD and a 500 gig spinning platter drive. Now I'm going to be installing these into the desktop because I use this desktop for editing, but there's only a terabyte worth of hard drive space in the desktop, and that's mainly being used by my brother's games. So I want to use the 500 gig hard drive for video storage, and then the 80 gig SSD for when I'm editing. I'll move everything onto the SSD, get it all into Premiere Pro, edit it, and hopefully everything will work a little bit faster, at least in the previews. Now what you need for this is you need a desktop computer that has an open 3.5 inch bay. There's also 2.5 inch bay conversions, but for this particular build we're using a 3.5 inch. And then you also need a couple of open SATA ports and a couple of open or unused SATA power port plugs. Now, when you're adding drives, you need to add more cables into the system, unfortunately. We're going to be using SATA, so I just bought a couple of SATA 3 cables. They each cost about $5 each. Pick these up at Fry's. You can pick them up just about anywhere that they sell basic computer parts. You also need to pick up a conversion kit, and this is a standard metal conversion cage. It's got enough space for two 2.5 inch drives, and then this wider section is for the 3.5 inch. The kit also includes some screws. These screws are going to be used to hold in the cage and hold in the drives to the cage. And then you're also going to need assorted screwdrivers, and it's going to be different for everybody's case, but most of the time it's just going to be a standard Phillips screwdriver. Alright, so what we need to do is first we need to turn off the computer.
Next up on the list will be to disconnect the power supply. For most people this will be sufficient, as it just provides a safety net. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to be disconnecting everything to reposition the computer for better viewing angles.
Alright, next up we're just going to be taking off this panel right here to expose the interior of the desktop. Right here we've got this 3.5 inch drive, and this 3.5 inch drive is currently powering this whole setup. But we have this 3.5 inch drive bay right here that is unused, and that's where we're going to be installing our kit. First things first, we got to do a little bit of tidying here, figure out what cables go where and what are going to be best utilized for our setup. These are Molex connectors. They're not going to be used for our setup, so let's go ahead and try and tuck these in up here. Cable management is, quite honestly, can be the hardest thing to do in any system. That's not used. That's also attached to another setup. That's being used. Alright, so this is the setup that we're going to be using. These are two SATA power connectors, and we're going to be hooking those up to the SATA drives. Alright, so right here I got my two drives that I'm going to be using for the build, the SSD and the HDD. But right now they're still in laptop brackets for my old laptop. So I'm going to be taking these out of the brackets, and we'll get a move on.
Now, one of the things that I found working with computers is you need a place to store all the screws, especially when you're working on laptops. A good thing to use is Tupperware containers or bottle cap lids from like a Gatorade bottle. Works really well and keeps all your screws in one place.
Alright, now I've got this enclosure here, and let's see what way we want to install this. Now if you look closely, there is the hole for the hard drive to fit, however it's not fitting. So let's try it in reverse. Alright. Okay. So it looks like we do have to have them in a little bit deeper than I'd like. It's a good thing I didn't get the angled connectors. But now that the holes are aligned, we just go ahead and screw it in.
Now, one thing to keep in mind when doing a setup like this is cable management. That's one reason why I took a minute to take a look at where my cables were going to line up at. The main thing is you don't want to block anything or reduce the amount of integrity that the system has. So lining up everything ahead of time is good.
Next up, the SSD. You want to make sure to place it in the same orientation as you did the other drive. That way your cables can all come through the same section. And the holes are lined up just like that. Alright. Now that the hard drives are in, I'm going to be plugging in the SATA cables. Now you got those out of the way. And time to plug in the SATA power. Let's see here. Alright, SATA power's in. Now we can go ahead and insert the drives. Alright, for your particular setup you might have to install the cables afterwards, but I can get away with doing it now. And you just want to make sure everything is lined up nice and neatly. And get the screws.
And now we're going to be installing these screws onto the exposed side of the chassis. I like to put them in fairly loosely to begin with, just so that I have some wiggle room until I get all the screws in. Then I'll batten down the hatches and make sure they're secured enough for the long haul.
Now while we're still on this side, let's go ahead and take our SATA cables and plug them into the SATA port. Now for those of you who don't know, that is a SATA port, and it's usually found on the lower right hand corner of the motherboard. Alright, what we're going to do now, just hook it up. Just tuck these around nice and neatly like. Boom. Those cables are in. Now we're going to flip around the case.
Now it's time to take off the other side panel to expose the drive cage and finish the job.
Now in this case, there's not really much to see because of the back paneling. But if you take a closer look, there is our Sata cage. And all we have to do is we have to plug in a screw right there and a screw right there.
Now at this point we're just putting in the final set of screws to hold in the drive cage. Then we're going to be flipping the computer around and tightening it all down and buttoning up the case. Once that's all done, we can go ahead and get the computer booted up and see if the drives are actually being recognized. Now I know it's superstitious for me to close up the case, but we were fine in this instance.
Alright, so we are now in UEFI BIOS utility in the advanced mode, and we can see our drives. The Toshiba drive is the drive that was in the computer to begin with. The ST9500 is the 500 gigabyte spinning Seagate Momentus drive, and the Intel SSD is the 80 gigabyte Intel SSD drive. Now all we got to do is boot it up, format the drives, and we are good to go. Hey everyone, thank you all for watching. If you liked that video, hit that like button. If you disliked it, go ahead and hit that dislike button. But tell me in the comment section below what I can do to better these videos and make them more enjoyable for you to watch. If you want to see more content from me, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I'm going to have more content coming out on the INR Techie. We're also going to be doing some stuff with the INR Gamer and the INR Driver. Stay tuned for those. Hopefully that stuff is going to be pretty dang good. And if you guys have any ideas on content for later episodes, go ahead and drop that in the comment section below. Give me some ideas to work on, and I will make it happen. Catch you all on the flip side.